咁今集咧，我哋主要咧就會係 focus on 翻喺 letting 嗰方面嘅問題。咁嚟緊咧就會有其他集數咧，就會係講翻唔同嘅關於例如 sourcing agent 啦，或者其他嘅大家嘅問題嘅。For this part, we will focus on letting first. This is your profession. So this time we'll focus on this topic. I have several questions to ask you. For landlord who is going to lend out his houses, what requirements or what procedures they have to do before they can let out the houses?
Okay, so if a landlord would like to let out their house, then there's lots of government regulations to protect the tenants and the tenants' rights and their safety, most importantly. So whereas you live in your own property and you have a gas boiler which supplies the water heating system and the heating system in the house, you wouldn't need any certification and you wouldn't need to if you serviced it, that's good for you and they recommend that. But if you don't service it, no one's going to come and check to say why you haven't been servicing it. For a landlord, that's completely different. So if you have a gas appliance in your house, whether it's a cooker to cook on, whether it's a fireplace in the living room, or it's a boiler in the kitchen or laundry area or whatever, because it's a gas appliance, those gas appliances, including the meter that's outside of the property, has to be all inspected. And more importantly, the gas boiler has to be serviced. That's just for the gas. And then they provide a certificate, which is something that has to be renewed on an annual basis. And that has to be provided to the tenants. It is illegal to rent a property without having that landlord gas safe certificate. They also need to, a landlord would also need to make sure there are smoke alarms in the house and in the appropriate places. So they would also need carbon monoxide and CO2 testers in the property. Not everywhere, not in every room, but just in the main places where there are gas sources. Okay. If it's apartments, then you may need heat detectors. And these are all the things that a letting agent can advise you, because there is so much information and sometimes it's hard to know what you must do, what you can do, what you don't need to do, and it becomes very complicated. Another thing a landlord must be aware of is that all electrics in the house have to be tested, including the consumer box where the electrics are coming into the home. And this has to be up to regulations. Every year the regulations keep changing. They keep adding more and more layers. In this country, the UK tends to have probably one of the most rigorous health and safety laws. And so what you may not be used to and you can get away with elsewhere, it's much more, very much about protecting the tenant.
So does it mean that if you don't have a letting agent, you are a landlord and then you rent the house out, and if there is something that you didn't do it, then you may break the law?
Yeah, see, the landlord may not purposely do it, but they may not know about it, and this is where yeah. And actually, if a landlord rents a property and they don't have all the paperwork on file, then it is almost impossible to evict that tenant from that property, because the law will say they were illegally there in the first place because you didn't provide them with all the paperwork that you were supposed to give to the tenant before they moved in. So there's a couple of other things like energy performance certificate. So there's the electrical certificate, and these have different timescales. So the gas one has 1 year, the electrical one has a 2 year or maybe 5 years. The EPC has a 10-year certificate, and then there's little other bits and pieces in between all that. That the tenant has to be provided with a list of all the paperwork, and that a private landlord may not have any intentions to do wrong, but could easily miss. And then if they serve the tenant notice at the end of the tenancy, the tenant could actually come back and say, well, you didn't provide me with this, I didn't have this, and so therefore you can't evict me. So that landlord then has to spend thousands of pounds going to court trying to evict that tenant who refuses to leave and possibly, most likely, will refuse to pay rent when they realize you didn't give them all the paperwork.
頭先咧我就問咗阿 Nas 咧，就係話如果你係一個業主，咁你喺英國嗰度租屋嘅時候咧，有啲咩嘢要 prepare 啦？咁阿 Nas 就講咗，哇，都幾多嘅。例如咧係咩咧？例如咧你間屋咧要有一個 gas certificate 啦，要有一個 electric certificate 啦。咁咧就係要驗咗你間屋嘅煤氣啦、電啦，例如一啲meters 啦，或者係啲地方係咪合規格。咁例如有啲如果你有啲kitchen 有係用明火嘅，咁你可能係有啲要有啲抽氣扇啊、抽風系統啊、通風系統啊，咁樣咧就係有唔同嘅 standard 嘅。咁而喺英國咧，咁health and safety 咧就係好嚴謹嘅，所以咧佢咧就係會要求咧個業主咧係做足晒呢啲功夫。咁而且呢啲條例咧每一年咧都會有改變啦或者增加，所以咧有時啲業主如果你冇一個 letting agent 去幫你手嘅時候咧，有機會你租咗間屋出去，其實咧你係唔合法嘅，即係可能你 miss 咗一啲 part 或者 miss 咗啲 paperwork 嘅話咧，咁如果到1年後或者2年後個租客又唔肯搬出又唔交租嘅時候，你要個租客離開，要求佢離開嘅時候咧，個租客咧係有權唔離開或者唔交租嘅。咁你可能咧就要去經過啲漫長嘅法律嘅程序，你先可以收翻間屋啦。可能咧甚至乎咧係要退翻啲租俾個租客，因為你當初租嘅俾佢嘅時候咧，你係唔合規格嘅。所以咧變咗，如果喺英國你係一個業主嘅話，你想去租間屋出去合法嘅話咧，其實咧揾翻一個 letting agent 咧去代表你，佢會幫你查核晒所有你需要做嘅功夫，包括你 gas certificate 啦、electricity 嘅 certificate，and then the EPC certificate。咁咧每一張 cert 咧每一張 cert 最緊要嘅咧，其實咧就係咧佢哋有唔同嘅年期嘅有效年期，例如煤氣咁樣啦 ，gas 咧其實咧每一年咧都要去 renew 嘅。咁電 ，what about electricity certificate is 5 years or 2 years?
Yeah, so it depends on the consumer box. Depending on the age of the consumer box, an electrician may say, based on current regulations, I can only issue you a 2-year certificate. If it's up to regulations within the last couple of years, then they can issue you like a 5-year certificate. And
so it may be different.
It varies, yeah.
It varies,
so they will
okay.
still charge the same amount because of the amount of work they have to do in the property, depending on the size of the property. But how long you get that certificate for may mean that at the end of those 2 years or within those 2 years, you have to get things upgraded in the home, such as your consumer box up to the current new regulations.
咁原來咧電嗰張 cert 咧就可以係2年或者5年，就係睇翻嗰個電工嚟到你間屋嘅時候咧，幫你 check 翻啲電器啦。可能啲電器啊，即係根據翻嗰個法例，可能係有時佢即係簽嗰張 cert 咧係簽2年俾你嘅啫，2年之後咧你就要 renew 噶啦。咁當中可能你要 upgrade 翻某一啲電器啦。咁有時如果例如可能你啲電器比較新嘅，或者個電工佢幫你驗完之後咧，佢可以係簽5年俾你。咁所以呢啲咧都係要 letting agent 去幫你嘅。咁另外咧仲有一個 EPC 啦，就係能源效益嗰張 cert 咧，其實就係 valid for 10年嘅。咁所以咧，其實除咗呢啲之外咧，咁letting agent 咧仲會幫你 prepare 一啲inventory list 啦，咁去列翻你間屋有啲包咗啲乜嘢啊，咁佢會保障翻嗰個業主嘅權益嘅。咁所以咧 letting agent 咧其實都幫咗唔少，即係幫咗個業主唔少嘅。即係如果你真係業主嘅話咧，咁我都 highly recommend 你咧就自己去做啦，因為咧始終英國嘅法例咧係比起香港或者其他國家咧係較為嚴謹一啲嘅。咁咧，因為今日時間都差唔多啦，我哋又講咗咁耐啦，係時候咧，我哋咧要食下啲嘢先。咁我哋唞一唞，咁下一集咧，我哋會講更加多關於一啲 letting agent 會 provide 嘅 service。咁咧，如果你有興趣做英國嘅業主，或者你已經係英國嘅業主咧，你都記得要留意啦。Maybe this time we should end at this time, and then we will discuss more details that you can tell us more about what the landlords have to make concern or maybe pay attention to, and then see you later.
Bye-bye.